morning and welcome to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover what drives today's leaders. Today my co-host is Kelly De La Torre, an energy attorney at ALG Attorneys in Denver, Colorado. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thanks for having me, Jan.
And we're doing our monthly segment on Energy 101. And what this show is such an interesting take on this conversation about energy, because we are going into this conversation about innovations in building sustainability. And Kelly, I want you to explain to listeners, what is building sustainability?
Well, I'm sure that Dennis will do a much better explanation than I can, but in the past, cheap energy allowed us to build really wasteful buildings, and years later we recognized that we have a huge source of alternative energy. It's called conservation. Not only that, but by incorporating architectural improvements and new technologies into commercial buildings, we can cut our energy use, cut our energy costs, and live better in the process. And so that's what the show's about today.
I love that. And we have one of the world's foremost leaders in this conversation, Denis Hayes, a seasoned veteran of many legislative, cultural, and courtroom battles over the years in these areas, and the author of numerous books and articles. Denis is joining us from Seattle, and he's probably still best known for having been the national coordinator for the first Earth Day when he was 25 years old. But he was also, during the Carter years, the director for the National Renewable Energy Labs. And during the Reagan years, he was a professor of engineering and human ecology at Stanford. But the work he's doing right now at the Bullitt Foundation really is so engaging and so innovative, because it's this effort to mold the American Pacific Northwest into a global model of sustainability. And I'm so excited to learn about this and learn about this benchmarking work, this leading work that's going on. Welcome to the show, Denis.
Well, it is a thrill to be on any show that will refer to me as one of the major leaders of the world. I want to record this for my daughter.
Oh, okay. Well, Denis, it's been 42 years since you were the first organizer of Earth Day. What are you doing now? Tell us what's going on now.
Well, the Bullitt Foundation wrestles with environmental issues that are directly interacting with people. There are a great many very important things that are involved with endangered species in the middle of rainforests and saving polar bears, and they all get a fair amount of effort and attention. You can never give them too much. But we had decided in this part of the country that there was inadequate money flowing to the things that directly affect human health and well-being that are also environmental issues. And so we tried to take a clear look at the principles of ecology and apply them to urban design and see if we could actually build cities that were sustainable. To just put 30 seconds more on that, 83% of Americans now live in cities. More than half of the world lives in cities. China intends to build a new United States over the course of the next 30 years. They're moving 350 million people to cities. And if you do that wrong, then we are going to be stuck with an enormous burden for a very long time. And so we're trying to help here build some models that might work.
Yeah, that's definitely an ambitious goal. Can you give us some examples of the Bullitt Foundation's work so far?
Well, the keystone for it right at the moment is trying to walk our talk. We have decided to build a building in Seattle, we're calling it the Bullitt Center, that attempts ambitiously to do everything right. We're trying to make it as energy efficient as we can, to produce as much energy with photovoltaic arrays, solar modules, on the roof of the building in cloud-covered Seattle as a 6-story structure uses. We'll harvest the rainwater off of the roof and put it through treatments to make it potable drinking water inside. And then after that water is used, we will be injecting the gray water after filtration and part of a green roof on the northern side of the building into a rain garden in front of it. We spent a year and a half researching everything that went into the building to make sure that we had no toxic elements that were going into the building. Researched more than 900 building components to find and/or to convince manufacturers, in some cases, to manufacture things. Right? It's designed to last for 250 years, whereas the average design time now for buildings, commercial buildings in the United States, is 40 to 50 years. That's sort of an artifact of the financing system, because real estate development is all about leverage. Banks value buildings by the present discounted value of future cash flows, and no matter what discount rate you use, a dollar that you receive 50 years from now is not worth very much for the bank today. And 250 years from now, it's literally zero. So we had to finance that part of the building out of our own equity as a foundation with essentially zero leverage. As part of that, we have a steel core that goes up through the middle, but the rest of the building is wood frame construction. The steel core portion is designed to withstand an earthquake of in excess of 9 on the Richter scale, and all of the wood framing around it. The first 6-story wood frame building in Seattle, built since 1926, should be flexible enough to also be able to withstand those tremors on the periphery of the building. So on and on and on. We are trying to literally move on a dozen different fronts simultaneously, and we'll see how it works. We'll have it finished by the end of the year, be moving into it by January 1st, and I hope it proves to be a great success.
Well, and I know I saw at the Global New Energy Summit when you were there as the keynote, I saw some designs of the building, and it's absolutely beautiful. And so can you just address a little bit about that? Sustainable construction, sustainable infrastructure can have form as well as function, can be beautiful, and not what you would think is being just a big square building. The new Bullitt Center is absolutely gorgeous, and I know you guys spent a ton of time on that you spent a lot of work to make it beautiful and really fit the neighborhoods that it's in Seattle, but that you also built it to be a zero footprint location. Can you address that a little bit?
Sure. The concept of form should follow function is looked at a little bit askance in some quarters, because many of the Bauhaus buildings that pioneered this really were kind of large, squarish, chunkish buildings with no real grace or charm to them. It was an act of rebellion against the ornamentalism that preceded it immediately in architectural trends. Ours doesn't have a lot of gargoyles or anything on it, but it is trying to be, in an almost Japanese simplicity way, something where there is grace as well as simplicity. And we're trying to make it not only beautiful from the outside, but beautiful from the inside. So there will be no person working in the building that will be more than 30 feet away from a 10-foot tall glass window that will provide daylighting and is operable, so it will provide fresh air. Much architecture is done, and this will sound unnecessarily sarcastic, but it's a quick way to say it, by architects who are frustrated sculptors. They make these buildings that are absolutely gorgeous pieces of sculpture, but they're not really designed to serve the needs of the people who are going to be in them. They're testaments to a concept of beauty. This is particularly true with modern computer-aided design and some of the clever new materials that are now available. So we tried to make it something that was functional but also graceful. In that regard, one of the blights of urban areas are, of course, all of the automobiles bringing one driver from wherever the home is to the building, occupying a huge amount of public space to travel on and to park in at both ends. And we just made a bold decision that was not going to be the future of Seattle. We found a place that was on very major bus routes, the biggest bus route that goes east-west in the city. It's less than a half a mile away from the light rail station. It's a third of a mile from where there will eventually be a trolley stop. And it's sufficiently centrally located that many people would have no difficulty bicycling or even walking to the building. I will be walking most mornings. So we decided we didn't need to have a garage. So we have a 6-story commercial building that has no place to park a car in. And that will eliminate some prospective renters immediately, but it will also be enormously attractive to others. We'll see how it works. Again, the smart thing to do in a building is to take a conventional building and change something. It's probably not smart to take a conventional building and change everything. We decided these issues are urgent, so we want to address them comprehensively. Let's see if we can just go for broke.
Love it.
Denis, I don't think people typically associate solar with Seattle. Can you really power a building in Seattle with solar?
That was a triumph of understatement. No, they don't associate solar with Seattle for very good reason. We have cloud cover here, certainly 8 to 9 months a year. The secret to powering a building with solar is to reduce the amount of power that you need just as much as you can. So I mentioned these floor-to-ceiling windows to provide daylighting. We've got a super efficient skin on the building that dramatically reduces the amount of energy that's required inside it. The little bit of heating that we require for space heating, we're getting through geothermal heat pumps in wells that are 400 feet deep underneath the building. To envision that, think of yourself as being on the ledge of a 40-story building looking down. That's how far down these geothermal heat pumps go. And they're really narrow, just like 1.5 inches, less than 2 inches across. And we have 26 of them pouring into this to provide that little tiny bit of space heating that the building will actually need because of its efficiency and because of the heat from its equipment inside and the heat from all of these 80-watt to 100-watt people who will be working inside it, radiating that energy. We're choosing the most efficient everything that we can find in the building. I found that this is not exactly a product endorsement, but it's what we're going to be using. Apple Airs can be streaming video and draw 12 watts. That's to say you can be watching 9 movies on 9 Apple televisions using the amount of energy that one 100-watt light bulb uses. We found task lighting for our desks that only draws 3 watts using a brand new configuration of LEDs. There are just these marvelous opportunities to save if you search them out. And you know, they're not even that exotic. Apple Air is a very nice computer, but there are millions of them out there. And then you say, well, yeah, but is it powerful enough to meet your needs? And then so we did a serious examination of what we use computers for. And it turns out not only does it meet our needs, these are enormously powerful little machines. But when I was at what's now the National Renewable Energy Laboratory out in Golden, Colorado, I got what I think of as my first computer. It was a Cyber 76 made by Control Data that was outsourced by Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, which had used it to design bombs. And when you think of what we used that machine, which required a full-time staff of 3, its own room, its own separate air conditioning system, and on, there's nothing that computer did that we can't do faster and cheaper with a trivial fraction of the energy on an Apple Air.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've really taken this very comprehensive approach to building the building: geothermal heating, LED lighting, wood framing, all of the things that you've talked about. And what I've heard is that this new Bullitt Center is going to actually be the greenest office building in the world. Can you tell listeners what that means? Because I think we all hear the word green, but I don't think anybody really understands what that means. Is this zero footprint? What is the greenest building in the world mean?
You know, and it's really hard to say because we don't. There are, you know, a billion buildings in the world. We think it has a good shot of being the greenest office building in the world when you look at how closely it emulates what would have happened on this land if we had not built a city here. Which is to say, if there were still a Douglas fir office here, it would be powered entirely by the sun that falls on it and whatever heat it got from the ground. It would be getting all of its moisture from the rain that falls on it, and it wouldn't be having things that are racing down the hills into Puget Sound. And it just has a literally very light ecological footprint. In terms of human health, it would have nothing inside it that would be giving off fumes that would be adversely affecting people. It would not have given off any toxics anywhere in the life cycle of any of the things that came there. To the extent that deer and elk and other animals passed through it and defecated, that would all be treated on site. We will have composting toilets. I'm reasonably sure that we're the only 6-story buildings that has composting toilets, which leads to all kinds of jokes in the press about the sound effects of it. We are, and part of this as well, is to try to make things so that without changing your behavior is naturally producing the right effects. And in a few places, trying to get people to change their behavior by making it more comfortable and attractive to do the changed behavior than the old-fashioned behavior. For example, on the first one, whenever anybody leaves an office building inside a city during the day, or in the evening, what you do is punch in the burglar alarm. In our building, when you punch in your burglar alarm, as the last person leaves the office, it turns off all the electricity in the office except the refrigerator. So that the so-called vampire things that take place when you have things plugged into sockets and they're not doing any work and it's an instant on or something, all of that stuff is shut off and we're using no energy at all at night except to keep the food cold in the refrigerator. For an example of the second one, my favorite is one that I pushed very hard on in this project. It was to make an irresistible stairway. I was visiting my sister-in-law yesterday at a hospital, and I stopped at the desk to find out what room she was in, and she was on the second floor, and I asked how I could get there. And she said, well, it's right over there across the way. The elevator's just punched two. And I said, okay, but how do I walk to the second floor? And the woman at the information desk on the hospital literally didn't know where there would be a stairway that I could climb one flight of stairs to the second story. With our building, as you walk in through the main entrance to the office section, which is the second floor and above, you'll be walking into a glass enclosed staircase that once you get up to the second floor and higher, has spectacular views of the Seattle skyline, and you'll be in this sort of light-filled upward tunnel with landings where you can meet with people and have conversations, and it will be, I hope, sort of a social affair. And we hope that people will walk all the way up to the sixth floor on this thing. Alternatively, you can go past it and down an area where we have a bicycle parking lot and other things. And this is all convenient. If you happen to be in a wheelchair or you need to use an elevator, it's not difficult. But when you get there, you'll get on an elevator that's sort of a medical quality. It would handle a fairly good load, but it goes pretty slowly up. So if you arrive at the front door, you can probably get to the fourth floor much faster if you simply go up the stairway than if you wind your way to the elevator and go up. Hopefully we'll get everybody off the elevator and onto the stairs, which, a few flights of stairs a day make you healthier than if you're not doing it. It's one of the best exercises we have. We have all these people that take elevators to work and go down to the club and get on a Stairmaster. How smart is that?
Absolutely.
How do you and the Bullitt Foundation envision that this project will help other buildings and help other companies incorporate all of these innovations?
Well, we will be proselytizing. The first thing we need to do is monitor it and see how well it works. In the end, there are those who believe that Obama got the Peace Prize prematurely a few months after he was installed. We are probably getting a bit more attention for this building before it's completed and operating than we should. But if after 6 months, a year, 2 years, it is really meeting all of our goals, or even most of our goals for it, I think that will make it very attractive to others who are trying to figure out similarly how to live lightly on the earth, to reduce their energy bills, to tap into renewable resources that don't produce any greenhouse gases, don't produce any radioactive waste, don't have any dependencies on the Middle East. We've had already attention from, for example, the Army Corps of Engineers brought their sustainability team from across the country. That was 50 people responsible for a huge amount of all federal construction. They come and take a look at our little building. We had a major health company that probably should remain unnamed, but it has a $5.4 billion a year construction project and will be building 100 major health facilities in the next 10 years. They came and toured the building. General Services Administration came, several developers have come by, and they're all taking a look at what we're doing, trying to figure out whether there is a way that they can make it pencil out for them. They've got a relationship with a financial institution that will let them build it. I think a major interest of the part of the building that you find in virtually none of the other buildings that are green, the durability of the core of the building, will be particularly attractive for institutions that, a university, for example, that will be building a building and will be using that building itself for hundreds of years into the future, then it becomes very much in their interest to do it, as compared to a developer that might be building it, will get it fully leased, and then will try to sell it to an insurance company whose values may not line up directly with this. You know, if you go to Oxford or Cambridge and walk around, you find that the average age of a building at Oxford is now more than 700 years. Wow. New College at Oxford is like 600 years old. I jokingly sometimes say that the biggest difference between the architects of Oxford and the architects of today is not so much that we have poorer architects, or that we have poorer engineers, or that we don't have as good a material. It's that they didn't have any economists 600 years ago, so there's no one to explain to them why they shouldn't invest for the future. And in fact, that's the final statement I'll say on this durability thing. We tend to think of everything in terms of consumption. These are transient things. We acquire something, we use it for a while, and we dispose of it. And it's an economic system based upon credit and the discounted value of future flows of dollars that makes that almost irresistible financially. But what I'm hoping we can begin to do, and I'm feeling that I'm most ambitious about this little project, is to help people start to think of these things more as investments in creating wealth. That building isn't something that you use for a little while, but the building becomes some of the permanent endowment of your society. That it will be there forever, or for a very long time at least. You know, that used to be very American. When my parents, who never had much in the way of assets, finally bought a house, and I was in junior high school by that time, after they'd done saving for a very long period, they bought it for cash, $18,000. It took them that long to put it up. And they never had a mortgage, they never had a credit card. When they bought a little bit of furniture, they would buy the highest quality furniture that they could afford in the hopes that they would pass it on to me or my siblings so that it would become part of what the family owns. You know, now we go down to some store, we buy furniture that's made out of sawdust with a little bit of plastic lacquer over the top of it. If it lasts 5-10 years, we're really happy that it endured that long. Yeah. A different mindset.
It absolutely is a different mindset, and that leads me to my next question. I mean, you are well known the world over as both a cultural and environmental activist, and you are engaged in really bringing this conversation to light, both around ecology and environmental and just all things sustainable, and you have been for years. I have to ask you, you know, in your shift from those roles at NREL and with Earth Day and all of that to becoming a real estate investor, you know, what have been, or real estate developer, I guess I should say, what has been that biggest surprise? And how have you learned all of the banking and financing aspects? Because I know there's been so much in and out over the last years as we've gone through this economic turmoil. Talk to that a little bit.
I guess the biggest single surprise, and it shouldn't be, this probably is just a reflection that I had not had occasion to think about it very carefully beforehand. But the biggest single surprise was how difficult it would be in many cities to do what we're doing in Seattle because of constraints in laws and regulations. Yeah. You know, the typical city, and this was true of Seattle before we brought this project to them and they modified their own regulations, are designed on the assumption that developers will want to build their building as inexpensively as possible, and that means that they will try to cut a corner here and there if they can. So we have these sort of elaborate prescriptive standards that detail how you're to do everything, and that's to try to make it so that there is a bottom line that cannot be worse than in a building. You can say that a building that is built to code is the very worst building that it's not illegal to build. and what that does is it creates this perverse set of things that if you want to build the best building you can, but you're constrained by all of those prescriptive standards, you just can't do it. So what Seattle did was to create what they have called the Living Building Ordinance. or if you can come up with credible models produced by disinterested third parties that suggest that the building you're proposing will significantly outperform the standard building that would be built according to code, then they will exempt you from all of these code requirements other than the ones that affect safety and fire and that sort of thing, which gave our architects a brand new latitude in how to approach the basic construction problem. And in terms of a model, if you were to build our building according to code in Seattle, it would have an EUI, Energy Use Index figure of about 52. That's 52,000 BTUs per square foot per year. Our building should be 16 EUI,
Wow.
so it'll be way under 1/3 of what a building built to code is. And in fact, in Seattle, it will be less than 50% of a LEED Platinum, which is ordinarily the index of a very green building, energy-wise. But we'll use less than half the energy that the LEED Platinum building would use.
Dennis, I wish we could go on longer. I know you're on a tight schedule, but we so appreciate having you here and sharing your insights with us.
You bet. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Thank you, Dennis. And Kelly, like Dennis said, to learn more about the Bullitt Foundation, it's bullitt.org. That's BULLITT.org. You're listening to Driving Force Radio. Welcome back to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover what drives today's leader. As always on our Energy 101 segment, my co-host Kelly De La Torre is here with me. Kelly is an energy expert and lawyer at ALG Attorneys here in Denver. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thanks, Jan.
Well, and we also have an amazing guest in this segment. It is Dr. Dorothy Robyn, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Environment. Welcome to the show, Dorothy.
Thank you, Jan and Kelly.
You know, Kelly, this part of this segment really ties back into our first segment with Denis Hayes, the founder of the Bullitt Foundation, where we were talking about building sustainability and innovations in sustainability and energy. Tell us more.
Yeah, that was such an exciting conversation because it just shows how we're taking the technology that's being developed here in the United States, we're putting it to good use, we're testing it out, we're showing that we can really cut our energy use, we can live better, we can reduce our emissions all at the same time. And so that conversation was great with Denis Hayes. And now in the second half of the show, we're going to look at it at a much broader scale and talk about what the Department of Defense is doing. And as you know, that is a huge area to cover.
It absolutely is. Dorothy, I want to come to you first. You have such a rich history, and I know you've been working with Kelly on and off here for the last few months. Can you give us a little bit of background of how you got to the DoD and how you got to where you're at?
Sure. Well, I've been at the Department of Defense for 3 years. I'm an Obama appointee. I have a PhD in public policy. I taught public policy for 4 years at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. I was on President Clinton's economic team for 8 years, and during that time I worked closely with the Department of Defense on a range of issues, including base closure, the BRAC process, and reuse of closed military bases. So I used to come out here in connection with the closure of Lowry, which is now a very successful development. So I got to know the Department of Defense, and a major focus then for them was the environment. Nobody was talking much about energy in those days. So when President Obama was elected, I got a call from the head of the transition saying, "How would you like to go to the Department of Defense and oversee from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, which is different from Army, Navy, Air Force. It's the coordinating office that oversees the individual services, and I have responsibility for military installations and things you can see from there. So all of the related environmental and energy issues, occupational safety, and military construction, all of the physical and the related issues.
Wow.
And it covers a huge number of buildings. Can you give the listeners just a perspective of sort of the scope?
Yes, we have a large built environment and a large natural environment. So on the built side, we have, as you said, 300, first of all, we have 500 installations, military bases. These are our permanent bases as distinct from our forward operating bases in the temporary bases that we set up in theater in Afghanistan. So we have 500 permanent military bases on 5,000 different sites, mostly in this country, but also in other countries. And on those bases, we've got 300,000 buildings, a total of 2.2 billion square feet of space, which is 3 times the footprint of Walmart, all the Walmart U.S. stores. We also have a large natural environment. We manage 28 million acres of land. We use that land to test and train, and we are very good stewards of that land because it's all we will ever have, and we're like a good farmer or rancher. We take care of it because we're going to need it indefinitely. There are those acres, our installations are home to 400 threatened species and another 500 endangered species. And about 75 of those are found only on military bases. So we spend quite a bit of effort taking care of those threatened and endangered species so as to maintain that habitat in its natural state, and so as to preserve our flexibility to continue to use that land.
Wow, so that is a huge area to cover, and I know that I've read that it's associated with an energy bill of $4 billion.
That's right.
So with that daunting figure in front of you, does the DoD have they implemented an energy strategy?
Well, let me say more about why because the cost is only one reason that we care about energy. And when I say energy, I mean what we call facility energy or installation energy. That's different from the energy that we use to operate our planes and ships and tanks. We refer to that as operational energy. The bill for that is about $15 billion a year. So the $4 billion is to to operate those 300,000 buildings. That's a lot of money, even by DoD standards. $4 billion is real money. So that's reason one. But there's a second reason that is every bit as important. We provide direct support for the warfighter from our permanent installations, more so than we did in the past. In the past, we used our bases largely to train and deploy soldiers, sailors, airmen. Increasingly, we provide direct support for the warfighter, so we fly unmanned aerial vehicles from our bases here at home. We stage homeland defense missions, humanitarian missions. We analyze battlefield data in real time. We are dependent on having power, electricity. We depend almost entirely on the commercial power grid. We typically have diesel-powered backup generators, but we are largely dependent, like everybody else, on the commercial grid. There is growing concern that the grid is vulnerable to disruption, and so we are concerned about we want to become less vulnerable to potential disruption to the grid. Those are the two things driving us: cost, energy security, the grid security of our military bases.
Yeah, we've had other shows on that talked about our energy security and that exact reason that we are reliant on our domestic grids to run operations overseas, and we've talked about technologies that are coming in to replace that and to more secure at least the critical infrastructure here. It is a huge issue.
So let me tell you having told you why we care about facility energy and improving our energy performance, let me tell you what our strategy is. We have a 4-part strategy, overlapping parts. This is my version of our strategy, but I think most of my colleagues would agree. And the number one, first and foremost, is reduce demand, reduce consumption. Secretary Chu, the Department of Energy Secretary, says energy efficiency is not just the low-hanging fruit, it's the fruit laying on the ground. The head of the National Renewable Energy Lab here in Golden, Colorado, said at a conference yesterday, we don't want to be putting green electrons into energy inefficient buildings. So first and foremost, we are trying to bring down this huge demand that we have in these buildings for energy, and that involves building new buildings that are much more energy efficient, but mostly it means going into our existing stock of buildings and retrofitting them. So we have $1 billion in next year's budget to retrofit existing buildings to make them more energy efficient. We are also relying heavily on performance contracts, so third-party financing, companies that specialize, they're called ESCOs, energy services companies. They will come in and say, we think we can lower your utility bill by doing the following. They then put the money up front and they are paid out of the savings in our utility bill. We get the energy savings, they get much but not all of the cost savings, and it's a win-win. So that's step number one, reduce demand. Step number two, and the reason I'm here in Denver to speak at a wonderful conference, Denver being really the center of renewable energy. So our second big strategic focus is expanding the supply of renewable and other distributed forms of energy on our installations. And that's because that contributes, in and of itself it isn't enough, but that contributes, along with some other things I'll mention in a minute, to making our bases more energy secure. Now we have made, as a department, we have made a commitment to develop 3 gigawatts of renewable energy on our installations by 2025, and the President mentioned that in his State of the Union address. He gave a shout out to Navy. He came here to Buckley, spoke at Buckley Air Force Base 2 days after that, and reiterated that it's great that DoD is doing it, but they're not doing it just to be green. They're doing it for national security reasons. They're doing it to become more energy secure. So we have a lot going on in that space at Fort Carson, at Buckley, at the Air Force Academy, and at other installations around the country developing solar. We have tremendous potential for solar, for geothermal, wind, biomass. Third, we are addressing the security of our bases very directly through development of microgrid technology, advanced microgrids which will allow us to accommodate, to incorporate the renewable energy, to better manage supply and demand locally, and to continue to operate critical missions if the grid goes down. If the grid is disrupted, then we can shed non-essential load, we can keep critical missions going. That's the third piece. And then the fourth piece, we're using our installations as a test bed for next generation technology. DoD is the most potent engine of technological innovation ever created, and a big part of that is demonstration and validation of new technology, and we're doing that with installations
all over. Yeah, I want to come back to the first one about reducing demand, and I know that at DoD you have something called the Enterprise Energy Information Management System going into play or in play already. And as in business, it's hard to manage when you don't have essential data. And I know that you've been updating policies on metering DoD facilities, all 300,000 of them. Can you talk a little bit about those details of that program and what that's going to mean to the overall strategy that's going into play?
Yeah, that's, we do a lousy job. We do many things very well, but we do a lousy job of metering our buildings, of measuring the performance of our buildings and the energy performance. And it's not hard to figure out why. We typically, we get one bill for an entire installation. So the local utility will send one bill to the Air Force Academy or to Fort Carson or to Buckley. And so we haven't had any incentive to meter individual buildings, but we need to know how individual buildings are performing. Right. Metering is all about, that's driven by the search for those buildings that are poorly performing, and you can't know that. You don't know which buildings are performing poorly without metering them. Metering is not enough. You need the mechanism to collect the data off the meters on a regular basis, and you need for that information to be generalizable and across the military services, so that we can compare how are dining halls across the services doing. How are our data centers performing? How are the investments that we're making paying off? In order to know that, you need an enterprise energy information management system. So we're in the preliminary stage of doing that.
Yeah, that's a great. So then, the personnel that are on those installations, are they then being trained in those specific areas, or so that now they're sort of expanding beyond their reach, or do they already have that sort of that sense?
Well, we typically have, most installations have an energy manager on staff, and then we also bring in outside energy experts on contract. The job of an energy manager is becoming a more complicated, more complex job. We have just some absolutely tremendous people, and the challenges are growing for them, because they are now in the business of dealing with utilities, taking advantage of the opportunity to make money by reducing our demand during peak periods, for example. So they begin to interact with utilities, and it's a much more sophisticated sort of a job.
And then is the energy manager the one that is also addressing your second issue, which is to expand the supply of renewable and distributed?
Well, we are the way that we are pursuing renewable energy is through third-party developers, and the reason that makes sense is because third-party developers, so a company like SunPower, for example, which is doing a 14-megawatt solar PV project at China Lake, one of our facilities in the Mojave Desert. They just broke ground on that. SunPower can tap into tax benefits for the development of renewable energy that we as a federal agency can't take advantage of. So it doesn't make sense for a large project for us to do it ourselves. It makes sense for us to partner with an outside renewable energy developer, and that's what we're doing. And each of the services now has an office focused on meeting this 1 gigawatt goal. The Navy's office is headed up by a man we refer to as Captain Gigawatt, and they are dealing intensely with these outside developers. And of course, everything is done on a competitive basis. We don't sole source anything, but we're learning as we're going. We're not yet very agile at this, but we're learning as we're going and trading lessons between the services.
Well, and I want to come back to another thing that you said, because you're doing the metering, you're adding these elements of new energy, and you also mentioned that this energy conversation is really an element of national security for the DoD, and that the smart grid conversation really plays a big role in that. Can you explain that a little bit more, and what's being done with smart grids in that area?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the real national security angle is our vulnerability to disruption of the grid for installations that are carrying out critical missions. And we do have security measures in place now. We have diesel-powered backup generators, but they're typically one to a building. They're not interconnected. They're not connected to the grid. This whole concept of advanced microgrids or smart microgrids it's a disruptive technology. It really is the bringing together of existing technologies, but in a way that allows a university or a community like Boulder or a military installation to have more control over its use of electricity, to be able to bring in locally generated power, to better manage supply and demand, to take advantage of some of the opportunities to make money by reducing demand during peak periods. But most important, if the grid goes down, we can keep those critical operations going, and our microgrid won't necessarily stop at the fence line. It may incorporate things in the adjacent community, because most of our soldiers, sailors, airmen typically live in the adjacent community. So microgrids are for us a really game-changing technology. We are out in the lead, and we are looking to commercial industry to develop the technology, and industry is. We're not trying to develop our own. We want to use what commercial industry is developing in order to take advantage of ongoing innovation and reduction in prices. Our role with microgrids, as with other technologies, is to be a test bed to demonstrate this new technology that is not yet commercially available, to try to address some of the issues that are unique to military bases, and get down the learning curve with this technology.
So this show is all about collaboration and how, if we all come together, we can move some of these issues forward. Is there a way that the state and local level and our public utilities can work with the military and help move these things along faster? And how could we help open the doors of communication in that area?
Well, I think there has to be a conversation with both the local utility and the adjacent community when we adopt or incorporate a microgrid. We absolutely have to work with local utilities, and we have a closer working relationship with some than others. Typically, we are if there's a big installation, we typically are we're often the largest energy consumer for a local utility. So we often have a close working relationship. In utilities, some utilities are more open to microgrids and renewable energy than others. So that's an absolute essential to work with the local utility, and that typically involves a relationship with the local community. We try to partner closely with the adjacent community. They are our hosts. We are dependent on them for schools, housing, and so absolutely it's a partnership.
So Dr. Robyn, we're running out of time, but where do you guys stand with respect to the goals that have been set forth, and what's coming up in the near to intermediate term?
Well, we're not. We're good on some goals. We're not as good on others. I think but I think it's interesting that we're seen as leading the charge, even as we are missing some of our goals. Congress has set some very ambitious goals in terms of reducing energy consumption and renewable energy. And I typically don't talk about those goals, not because we're not making all of them, but because I don't want people to think that we're doing this only because we've been given statutory mandates. That isn't the reason we're doing this. Yes, we do have these mandates, and the mandates are helpful, but we're doing this for the reasons I said in the beginning, because $4 billion is a lot, and because our installations don't have the energy security that we want. So that's what's driving us. We've got a long way to go in in terms of getting to renewable energy, but our commitments will certainly take us well beyond what Congress has directed us to do. I think that the space to watch is our use of our installations as a test bed for next generation technology. I think that's something we're doing out of self-interest, but that can have widespread benefit to the country as DoD's technology leadership has had in other areas. The internet came out of the Department of Defense, out of the agency DARPA. So I think that by being very self-interested, I think we can make an important contribution to the nation's broader clean tech revolution.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is really exciting, and every time I go back to DC, and the exciting part to me is that I'm seeing progress, and I'm excited to get these technologies out there, and then tying back in with our previous conversation with Denis Hayes, I mean, he's showing progress too, and all of these things are going to not only help create jobs and move our economy forward, but they're also cutting emissions. They're letting us save money and put it into other areas of the economy, and I just think that right now we're in a transition period, and it's very exciting.
A transition period, but also an innovation period. And like Dorothy just said, you know, these innovations are going to take us into this next unknown area, and that's really exciting to watch and see, and to be able to talk to leadership like Dorothy, and to share the knowledge that you have, or that Denis shared, is absolutely fascinating, and great to hear that people are really pushing that needle and making a difference out there.
And making a difference in saving lives too, and that's the best part.
And I would just say, I think the real action is not in Washington, it's out in places like Fort Carson and Buckley and the Air Force Academy. That's really where the innovation and the real forward movement is taking place for the Department of Defense.
Yeah, and I know that we're from Colorado, but I agree with you. We have seen some great stuff going on at Fort Carson, and we're so well situated here with Boulder. It's an innovation center, and NREL and the universities here, and so I really think that we do have a key role in this whole thing, and I'm excited to be part of it.
Absolutely. Dr. Robyn, I want to thank you for being here with us today at Driving Force and for sharing the work that DoD is doing. It's exciting to hear about it. It's exciting to see where you guys are going, and that you're really leading this charge around innovation, but also, like Kelly said a minute ago, job creation and all kinds of new things that really build economic development in our community. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Dr. Robyn, is there any way that people could learn more about what's going on at DoD and the energy stuff that you guys are doing?
Sure. On DoD's website, which I think is dod.mil or .gov, there is a section called DoD Goes Green.
Kelly, Dorothy, thank you so much. Come back next weekend to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover what drives today's leaders. Have a great weekend.